where does this sort of slot in on the spectrum of Del Toro's work, with like the Pan's Labyrinth and Shape of Water on one end and Pacific Rim and Blade 2 on the other, which, by the way, both ends of those spectrums are pretty rad.
They are pretty rad, that's true. Stories about generational trauma are nothing new, chronicles of the pain that is handed down from parent to child and, in time, right on down the line to the next child, never breaking the cycle. It's, as Mrs. Potts once said, a tale as old as time. From Kronos eating his own little ones, only to suffer the eventual wrath of those children under the leadership of Zeus, all the way to Michael Corleone's fall into the very underworld that his father hoped he would rise above. The pain is real. It's also a great avenue for telling compelling stories. I'm Scott Collura, and this is my review of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein.
I had determined that the memory of my evils should die with me.
Pretty much everyone knows the story of Frankenstein, and Del Toro, who's been trying to get a movie based on the iconic novel made for at least 20 years, doesn't deviate from Mary Shelley's work in any way that anyone but fans of the OG would notice. Some characters are missing, others are added, but the bones of the story remain intact. Man makes monster, man rejects monster, monster gets pissed off. But more than just intact, these bones are also seemingly pulled from, or is that carved out of, Dr. Frankenstein's choicest picks, his finest specimens, because this iteration of Frankenstein is, like its creature, a beautiful, haunting thing through which classic themes are made to feel fresh and new. Not only is Oscar Isaac's Victor Frankenstein a monster for much of the film's runtime, cue everyone's favorite "Who's the real monster" line, but he's a monster who was spawned by a monster, his stringent and abusive father Leopold, played by Charles Dance, who at this point in his career is destined to play the same miserable asshole over and over again. So of course that generational pain continues to rear its ugly head, or perhaps in this case not so ugly, when Victor brings life to his creature, played by a scarred yet still movie star handsome Jacob Elordi. Elordi is a Marvel here, and his creature exhibits Marvel-esque superhuman abilities, which is fun, belying his turns as bad guys or unsympathetic characters in titles like Euphoria, Priscilla, and Saltburn. No, while the creature in GDT's Frankenstein will mess you up if need be, and does in fact mess up man and beast alike in spectacular fashion, Del Toro writes him and Elordi plays him in the finest Karloffian vein, a sympathetic sad sack SOB who just wants a friend. That the actor also seems to be channeling the bodywork of Del Toro regular and creature player extraordinaire Doug Jones only accentuates how different Elordi's creature is from past incarnations. He pivots his body, twists his waist, leans in and back, and cocks his head in such a way as to always remind us that, after all, the creature's body is actually a series of bodies that are still getting used to each other. Isaac as Victor, on the other hand, runs the risk of becoming too unlikable at times. When his creature is born, there are genuine moments of affection between the two, but the newborn's apparent inability to evolve and grow, in terms of speech he can't even get any further than saying Victor over and over again, frustrates the genius and frankly dickish doctor. Just as his father did before him, Victor punishes his child rather than nurtures him, and so the cycle continues, with the creature never even having a chance at normalcy, his appearance notwithstanding. But the result is that Isaac's Victor very nearly becomes the film's villain, which perhaps isn't a new concept in the Frankenstein mythos, but occasionally works against the film in the character's darkest moments. Colin Clive, who played the Mad Doctor opposite Boris Karloff's monster, was always sympathetic, mind you, even when he was operating at peak Looney Tunes.
He's alive!
And then there's Mia Goth, who brings to the Elizabeth Harlander character an otherworldliness that has sort of become a trademark for the Maxine and Suspiria actress. Named Elizabeth Lavenza in the book, the character is adopted into the Frankenstein household and eventually marries Victor, but in this version, she's engaged to Victor's brother William. William usually doesn't make it to adulthood when he's present in a Frankenstein story, falling victim to the creature in a savage act of revenge. But again, Del Toro tweaks and twists these plot elements, with William winding up in the way of Victor's traditional love interest, while also giving Elizabeth an uncle in the person of Christoph Waltz's Heinrich Harlander. And while Waltz is typically a welcome addition to any film, his character, a benefactor who pays for Victor's experiments, ultimately doesn't add much at all beyond helping to make the film slightly longer than it needs to be. Frankenstein is full of blood and gore and dismembered limbs and ripped off jaws and crunched skulls, but it's not a horror movie. Like the director's 2015 gothic romance Crimson Peak, this is a film that feels big, engulfing the viewer in a world where a sad wife's deep red gown is set against the stark backdrop of a foreboding castle. It's a place where the city streets run red with slaughterhouse blood, where a frozen battlefield is marked by a horse covered in ice, still in mid-gallop with its rider astride. And yet, at the same time, the beauty of creation itself is infectious, as when Elordi's creature first experiences the sun, as Victor tells him, "Sun is life."
What manner of creature is that? What manner of devil made him?
Del Toro also wears his geek cred on his sleeve. The creature's design is very clearly inspired by comics legend Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein, while an early experiment by Victor involves half a corpse coming to life in a gasp-worthy but somehow funny scene that feels plucked right out of The Return of the Living Dead. The combination of influences fused together and brought to life by a genius is especially fitting here, given this movie's plot and the 100+ years of adaptations Mary Shelley's work has endured. And always, it's Del Toro's love of the source material itself that shines through, as the filmmaker tells his unique version of this classic story while still paying respect to the Shelley book that he clearly lives and breathes. Anyone who knows the book can tell you that a happy ending does not seem in the cards for either Victor or the creature. But for Del Toro, the f***ed-up Frankenstein family deserves redemption after all those years of suffering and self-inflicted pain. That Del Toro chooses to tell his story in two parts, one from Victor's point of view and the other from the creature's, only serves to drive home that this is ultimately a story about atonement and forgiveness. Can the creature forgive Victor's failings as a parent? Can Victor break the long cycle of abuse? Well, you know what they say, all you need is love.
Now, run.
I'm giving Frankenstein a 9 out of 10. Some of us have been waiting 20 years for Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, and the film does not disappoint. The filmmaker puts all of his skills to bear in this spin on the Mary Shelley story, as he goes for a tale of tragedy, romance, and redemption, rather than a straight horror flick, which isn't to say that there isn't plenty of gore or creepy moments, but that's the trimmings of this film, as blood red as they are. No, Del Toro is really interested in, to paraphrase the creature, why violence so often feels inevitable, and what it takes to stop it.
Hello, that is our review of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I'm Clint Gage, and joining me is the reviewer of Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, IGN's Associate Director of Features, Scott Collura. Scott, what's up, dude?
Not much. How's it going?
It's going, man. It's going. So this is a movie that months ago we were looking at the release schedule, and you planted your flag in this one. You were honestly a little pushy about it. What was it about Frankenstein that had you so excited to do this review?
Wow, I'm an old school Frankenstein guy, not just in appearance, but also as a fan. And, I interviewed Guillermo del Toro, not to age myself too much, but I interviewed him like 15 years ago about this movie, because he's been trying to make this movie for at least 20 years. And I remember sitting with him in a hotel lobby in Midtown, talking to him about it. He was promoting one of the Hellboys, maybe. I can't even remember now what it was. And he was so enthusiastic back then about wanting to make this film. And then, of course, he sort of famously has a lot of dream projects that he's talked about for a long time.
Right.
But the chance, as a fan of his and as a fan of Frankenstein, the chance to get to see him finally realize this one, which is like a dream project for him, I had to, I love the Frankenstein movies and I love him. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, Del Toro's, he's a guy that you root for.
Yes.
I feel like he's, and yeah, it's kind of his thing is he's got a handful of movies, and it's always interesting for us to talk to filmmakers that have things in development, because you always want to ask, well, what about this?
Yeah, I mean, Del Toro, he is such a fanboy ultimately, right? You can just watching the movie, but also just talking to him, it's like his enthusiasm for these things is so strong that it's infectious, really, And
it really shows on screen. But and I know you mentioned that you're a fan of these movies from way back. I know that you're the classic Universal Monster sort of catalog, all the old Boris Karloff stuff. And I've been in meetings with you where you've demanded to keep Bride of Frankenstein near the top of our best horror movies of all time list. I mean, have you always been from way back a fan of these classic monster movies?
Yeah, I guess so. You know, it's that one of those things where it's so hard to remember now. But I think my earliest memory of seeing the Universal Monster movies was they used to do this thing in the summertime where they would play films at the school for the kids. Anyone could just come for the afternoon and they'd play movies in the auditorium. And they would play these, what in retrospect I realized were short versions of the Universal movies, monster movies, because they would only be the parts with the monsters in them. All the boring stuff with the humans was cut out. And I think they were like old Super 8mm silent reels that you could buy. I'm not exactly sure, but I fell in love with them then.
Del Toro he's got such a distinct look to his film. We talked about it, like how much he's such a fanboy and how much care and love goes into every frame of his movies. So when it comes to him making a movie, Frankenstein, a movie that's been remade and revisited literally for over a century now, what does a guy like Del Toro add to a movie like Frankenstein?
Yeah, it's a good question. He brings the Del Toro-ness to it, right? It's such a sort of sweeping, beautiful, gothic thing that he's doing. Like, I think he's gone on the record talking about how it's not a horror movie, and it's really not. It's, you know, it has its scary bits and it has plenty of gory bits, but it's really like it's a gothic romance in a lot of ways. It's also it's sort of a tragic tale for all the characters involved, which isn't necessarily new to Frankenstein either, but the way that Del Toro depicts it all feels new and fresh. The scope of things is just unparalleled in this movie in terms of Frankenstein stories. Like, you of course remember the Kenneth Branagh Frankenstein, which was called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it was sort of meant to be much more closely to the book than the Karloff movies or most.
Sort of an answer to Bram Stoker's Dracula that came out a couple years prior.
Yeah, totally was. Same producers as well, I think. But it didn't really work out. This one is more like Del Toro takes a version of the book, but does his own thing with it, but picks the bits that are most important to telling the story he's trying to tell. But he does it with that Del Toro flair. I mean, like Mia Goth's wardrobe alone, like the colors that she wears are Victor Frankenstein's mom is seen in flashbacks, and her as well. Like she's dressed in striking red against this like sort of creepy dark gothic castle that she lives in, and it's just it's when you watch it, it's like, yeah, this is the guy that made Kronos, you know, like you can just sense it. He made Kronos for like, 1/100th of what the budget of what this thing is, but there's very much a lot of the same vibe there as well. So I was anticipating that from him, and from where I'm sitting, he didn't disappoint at all.
Yeah, it is one of those projects that the match of filmmaker to the film just makes too much sense to not be excited about.
Yeah. Like Crimson Peak is probably the closest analog in some ways, just in terms of the production design and stuff, because that was also a gothic story. Right. But this feels even bigger than that, I would say.
Yeah, so I mean, in talking about the rest of Del Toro's work, like where does this sort of slot in, on the spectrum of Del Toro's work, with like the Pan's Labyrinth and Shape of Water on one end and Pacific Rim and Blade 2 on the other, which, by the way, both ends of those spectrums are pretty rad, but, it's a wide variety of movies that the guy makes.
Yes, they are pretty rad. That's true. It's closer to, obviously it's closer to the Shape of Water and the Crimson Peak side of things. I don't think this movie's going to necessarily win any Oscars like Shape of Water. Not that it shouldn't, but, we just know how the Oscars go, and they don't, it's a monster movie, right? So they're less inclined. Having said that, Shape of Water was a monster movie. Like I say, it's not like the sort of more action-oriented monsters for the fun of it type vibe that Del Toro is so good at. That's not what this movie is. There's a romantic aspect to it. It's a sort of a tragic story. It's really beautifully acted. Like Jacob Elordi's monster is much more the creature from Shape of Water than he is a Hellboy monster. He's very, very sympathetic, and he's just terrific. I mean, he really, like, he pulled it off. Like, the guy from Euphoria is going to be the monster. It's like, yeah, he is the monster. It's great. Yeah.
Jacob Elordi, the guy from Euphoria.
Am I showing my age again?
No, you're trying to unshow your age with that one, I think. You're overcorrecting a little bit.